So the second piece that we wanted you to read for today was the Kondo piece. And so one of the things that Purnima asked that we make very clear to you is that Kondo is a scholar activist, right? So this is somebody who's involved in academia, but who also does grassroots work, who is also very involved with the communities with which she writes about. So she's writing alongside communities. She's not necessarily just writing about communities in this sort of anthropological way, even though she's an anthropologist, but she's an anthropologist and a dramaturge. So she's heavily involved in the theater and has worked in the theater for years. So she's coming from a very specific perspective um, around theater and drama, and a very specific perspective around Asian American perspectives on race. So there are two major sections in there that we don't necessarily need you to focus on, which is the sections where she's talking about Puccini. So be mindful that the Kondo writing is about Madame Butterfly, the play, right? So it's giving you a different context under which you should understand the dynamics of this play, the production of this play, and why it's important that the Cronenberg film has this sort of metatextual relationship with the narrative that it's constructing, while it's also sort of attempting to complicate and deconstruct um, things in the Puccini writing. And in some areas, I'm not totally convinced of the subversion of these Orientalist tropes. In other places, it proves sort of interesting or provocative. But don't worry too much about the sections where she's really delving into Puccini. Um, Again, skim what you can, sort of glean what you can from them and move forward. The other section, which is some of the more really difficult theoretical sections, is a lot of section 3 where she's talking about the self and personhood. It's very abstract. It's essentially this kind of existentialist discussion on the self. So don't worry too much about that, but some of that conversation picks up meaningfully on page 14 when she starts talking about opening the conventions and subverting the conventions of Madame Butterfly and M. Butterfly. So that's a significant place um, where you can sort of pick up that discussion. So if there's really dense theoretical sections, again, glean what you can from it, move forward, and make sure the sections where she's talking about the characterizations of um, Asian communities and of Asian women, like why are these things important, right? Or when she's giving you a little bit of background about the play itself. So at least you can understand the references that are being made in the film and how the film's trying to play with some of these conventions. And the other thing that I want you to be mindful of as you're reading and you're watching the film is just the geopolitics of the film, right? What's the political background of the film? When is this film set and why is that significant? What is the political setting of the film, right? So it's happening sort of bits and pieces of it are happening in the plot, but a great deal of it is happening in the story. So remember the difference between sort of story and plot when we think about these cinematic techniques, the convention. Plot is what we get on the screen. Story is a much sort of fuller thing that takes into account what you're not seeing on the screen. So we really want to push you to consider the geopolitical implications that are not necessarily taking place on the screen, but have a lot to do with the relationships and, of course, shape the relationships that people have. And why do we have this sort of intense political commentary and commentary about communism, for instance, throughout the film? So take that into consideration when you're watching. Be attentive to moments in the film, those kinds of moments in the film that are really overtly addressing the socio-political and geopolitical implications of what's happening on the screen. And why is it those moments that get juxtaposed with these discussions on politics? Um, and so, in the final part of our sort of virtual class, I just want to make sure that I hold space for any questions that you might have about the writing or any questions that you might have about the film. And the last thing that I want to say and really impress upon you is that Purnima is going to clarify Orientalism, which is a absolutely key concept, and it is going to show up in your final. So please, if you are not able to make it to lecture, make sure that you review her lecture notes and podcasts and do your absolute best to make it to lectures this week, because this is actually a really important unit. Um, and I'm going to say that it's going to be really important and informative to the way that you view most films and the way that where Orientalism presents itself with this East versus West dichotomy. It's one of the most sort of important concepts in post-colonial studies and things like this. So if you're not familiar with Edward Said, if you're not familiar with Orientalism, you really want to be attentive to this unit. The other thing that I'm going to say, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, is that Thursday is a very important class. I want to encourage you to be on time on Thursday. And remember that should we have discussion um, groups, that it's imperative that you be there on time to make sure that you get credit for coming, and make sure that you don't arrive so late that you're not able to contribute and thus not able to get credit. So those are the two things. This week is a very important week. I know we're getting closer to the end of the quarter and we're all really tired, but hang on there for me. Do your best to make sure that you're there for Tuesday and Thursday's lecture. And again, Thursday, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, very important.